So, welcome everyone. My name is Ayelet Cohen. I'm the Events and Programs Manager for the Burnaby Board of Trade. Before we start, I would like to take a moment to recognize that we are on the traditional homeland of the Hunkaminam and Squamish-speaking people, and to extend appreciation for the opportunity to hold a meeting on this territory. So for today's event, throughout this interactive session, we will take a facilitated dive into each of the 4 pillars to identify inclusive workplace practices that help organizations to recruit and retain people with disabilities. You will learn to easily adapt various stages of recruitment and retention practices to increase workforce inclusion of people with disabilities. So just before I hand it to our presenters, I would like to thank our annual partners, who are those organizations who stand out as top corporate citizens in Burnaby and support our work throughout the year. And you can see their logos on the screen now. So thank you for that. And now we're pleased to get underway with today's session. And as we go through today's presentation, if you have questions, please enter those in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screens, and we'll try to save a few minutes at the end to answer those. So today I'm pleased to be joined by Barb Kalashnikov, Employer and Community Coordinator for the Burnaby Brentwood Work BC Center. So Barb, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Ayelet. It's my pleasure to be here this morning. I really appreciate the opportunity to share a bit about BC and introduce you to Jimmy Miller-Dixon and the 4 pillars of accessible employment. Before we get on to the main event, I would like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from my home office in Maple Ridge on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Stone First Nations. And it's my privilege to have the opportunity to live, work, play, and learn on this land. I'm going to speak briefly about how Work BC can support you in becoming a more inclusive employer. More employers in British Columbia are recognizing the benefits of inclusive hiring practices. Hiring from a diverse population strengthens your business, increases your impact in the community, and brings new knowledge and fresh viewpoints into your workplace. What we can do at Work BC is provide pre-screened clients and help you navigate the many resources available to businesses that are interested in expanding their candidate pool to include people with disabilities. From accessing a wage subsidy for potential hire to providing assistive technology that will support a person on the job, to connecting you to tools and information to ensure you hire and retain the best candidate for your organization. Jamie Miller-Dixon has a wealth of knowledge and firsthand experience working with employers who are looking to recruit and retain candidates from this untapped talent pool. Jamie is the principal of McLeod Silver HR Business Partners based in Vancouver and an inclusive workforce consultant with CanWin. Jamie has an extensive HR background of over 30 years, specializing in workforce diversity and inclusion, recruitment, training, and HR startup. Her experience spans multiple industries. She has developed and delivered diversity training programs for both public and private sector employers. Jamie has also been involved in a project that is recommending recruitment and retention standards to Accessibility Standards Canada to support the new Accessible Canada Act. Jamie co-authored Untapped Talent, Business-to-Business Guide on Innovative Recruitment and Retention, a resource for employers on how to easily adapt to the recruitment, onboarding, and retention process that supports them in hiring more people with disabilities. And on that note, it is my pleasure to end the presentation.
Thank you, Barb, so much. And thank you to the Burnaby Board of Trade for hosting this event. Welcome, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with you. I'm actually coming to you from Steveston, BC, which is the traditional summer fishing grounds of the Musqueam people here in the Lower Mainland. So yes, welcome to the session that we have developed for you. I just want to do a quick sound check. How is the sound, Sarah?
Good.
Awesome, thank you. So yes, welcome to the 4 Pillars of Accessible Employment. Connecting Can Win is all about connecting employers to diverse talent. Here's what we'll cover off today over the next hour and a half together. I'll do a brief introduction to Canadian Partners in Workforce Innovation, Can Win for short. We'll dive deeper into the 4 pillars, and then we'll have a chance to really consider each pillar in your organization, and you'll have a chance to ask some questions. I'll introduce some resources to you that are available to you at any time online. They're free and they're amazing, specifically set up through the President's Group. If we have time, we'll show a short video, but I may include that as a link in a follow-up after the session. And again, this is your session, so if you have questions, feel free to raise those questions and let's explore this topic together. Yes, a little bit about our history. For almost 9 years, we were BC Partners in Workforce Innovation. We were funded through the provincial government, the provincial BC government, and our whole goal was to work with employers who were committed to be inclusive of people with disabilities and recruit on their behalf. We were initially funded as a research initiative to test this model. So rather than starting with the unemployed job seeker, which is traditional, through the service sector, and then reaching out to employers to see who would hire that individual, we started with employers who had job openings and were committed to being inclusive, and we recruited on their behalf. So it worked a bit like a recruitment search firm, only our talent pool was quite unique to the persons with disabilities talent pool. We kept getting extended by the federal government. Eventually we became funded through the federal government of Canada. And during COVID, they just kept renewing our contracts. And after 8-9 years, we were quite finished researching the model. We discovered that it works well for employers, and had an opportunity to expand in other provinces. So as of April, we expanded into Canadian Partners in Workforce Innovation, Can Win for short, and expanded into Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario. And we added team members in those provinces as well. So yeah, this is us since 2013. Our inclusive workforce specialists work directly with employer partners to recruit people with disabilities, people with diverse abilities, as we prefer to say, to be included as part of their workforce. In addition to recruitment, we, as Barb mentioned, provide some assistance with retention, inclusive workforce retention, training, customized training, and other advisory services for employers that are connected with us. We focus on abilities as we connect job seekers with diverse abilities to a variety of different employment opportunities with employers who are inclusion focused. And we collaborate with our community service partners to enhance our collective impact. So what that means is we do that recruitment through the Service Partner Network and WCG Services, Work BC in Burnaby, many of the Work BC centres across the province, Community Living BC organizations, Canadian Mental Health Association, employment programs. We're connected with 154 different points of contact here in British Columbia that provide support services to job seekers with disabilities that are looking for employment. So we launch a recruitment campaign out to that network, but we can also engage with job seekers directly if the person is not connected to an employment support program. If we really think the person would benefit from being connected to additional supports, we reach out to our service partner network and see if they can provide support to the individual. Our goals as we look to expand our capacity in Canada is really to expand and increase employer capacity in Canada to hire inclusively. As I mentioned, we added resources to support the expansion in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario. Our goal is to help address workforce needs. We know there are a lot of needs, and workforce shortages have been coming for years, and we all know they're here now in a very big way, but help to address workforce needs of employers in support of economic recovery in our country. We also have, through Open Door Group is the project holder with the federal government, and they have an untapped Inclusive Workforce Awards. This year it's in Vancouver on October 13th, awards and conference, but we're looking to expand that next year to Calgary and the year following in Ontario. Because there's an identified need to be recognizing employers that are doing some really good work and demonstrated commitment in this space. So those are our high-level goals. This is our typical recruitment process, just to share it with you. Always starts with the job opening with the employer. We launch that recruitment campaign out to our service partner network. Service partners who are working with job seekers with disabilities recommend a candidate if they're interested and qualified for the position. Our team, one of the consultants, will interview the individual, and if there's a good match to what the employer is looking for, we would recommend that person to the employer. If adjustments are required for that person to succeed on the job, we make those arrangements with the service partners and provide that support to the employer. All right, so that's top 3 ways we help employers. Our whole goal is to make it easy to hire. We know that employers will often, and this is the last sort of group of people in part of our workforce, where we have a sort of a fear around hiring people with disabilities. That fear is, what if it doesn't work out? It may feel even worse to have to fire somebody with a disability or let somebody go in their probation period. But ultimately, if things don't work out, you handle that in the same way you would with an employee who doesn't have a disability. Oh, you can't see my slides? I am sharing them. Barbara,
give us a second and let's see if we can share it on our end.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Because I just sent a message to Sarah saying, I don't know if it's just us, but yeah, we're not seeing slides. So we'll get that sorted out.
Oh. I'm so sorry about that.
Is it showing? Are you seeing it, Jamie?
I am, yeah. Let me, maybe what I'll do is I'll close it out. Sarah, are you looking at something on your end?
Yes, I am. Oh,
okay.
Oh no, that's my screen. Sorry. If you can try resharing your slides.
I'm going to try it again. How's that?
I think something's coming. Yeah, we can see him now.
Yes, there we go.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. My apologies. Yeah. Thank you for letting me know.
You're welcome. No worries.
Okay. We'll pick up where we left off. Yeah, so our goal is to make it, I'm so sorry you haven't seen all the beautiful slides that we've put together for you so far, but we'll attach it at the end and you'll get to see them all after today's presentation. Anyway, the top 3 ways we help employers is ultimately our goal is to make it easier to hire. You're connected through one point of contact that reaches 154 points of contact in the province. We support employer DEI inclusive hiring commitments, and we're all in to share our subject matter expertise. All of our inclusive workforce specialists have human resources background, combined with having had experience bringing diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives into the organizations that we've worked with in the past. And you're well supported in Burnaby with Work BC Burnaby. Barb and team have a lot of experience in working with diverse job seekers, and you're very well supported through your Work BC Centre in Burnaby. This next slide that I wanted to just kind of highlight We do have legislation, so kind of what's driving additional interest. Governments are very interested in getting people with disabilities connected to employment. Roughly 47% of people with disabilities who are interested and capable of working are unemployed, compared to what, 5.55% unemployment rate across the board in Canada. So there's an entire population of people that can work, want to work, and are not engaged to the workforce yet. And so now we have, in effect, a couple of pieces of legislation. The first one is the Accessible Canada Act, which has an employment standards component to it. As Barb mentioned, we were working on a project to make recommendations to Accessibility Standards Canada on what could be included as an employment standard. That applies to federally regulated employers, of course, across Canada. And it's intended to, it's currently the employment standards are out for public consultation and feedback input. It's there until mid-October, so if you're interested, you can Google it, Accessibility Standards Canada Employment Standards Review, and have a look at what's there if you're federally regulated. We know that in BC, we also have our, sorry, I'm in the wrong slide. So in British Columbia, we also have the Accessible British Columbia Act, and it's applicable to BC businesses, but the way that the government of BC is rolling it out is a little differently. It's a little different. It's first of all applying to the provincial crown corporations. And so if you're a provincial crown corporation, you're well aware of what's required in putting forward a plan and actioning that plan. And if you're a non-crown corporation business in BC, this will eventually roll out. They're starting with the provincial crown corporations in British Columbia. And then the Accessible Canada Act is now in force, and again, applies to federally regulated employers. So in Canada, we've got accessibility legislation in British Columbia, Manitoba, and Ontario. Other provinces and territories are working on it. One thing to share with you is the British Columbia Accessibility Act. The legislation is very closely tied and based on the Accessible Canada Act. So our BC provincial legislation is going to be very similar to the federal legislation. So have a look at what's out there now, and you'll get a sense of what standards will look like. All right. So we know in terms of value, the value of workforce inclusion of people with disabilities. I've taken this off the President's Group website, and diverse and inclusive workplaces have better business outcomes. And this has been known for a while. These stats haven't really changed that much, but research has shown that businesses that are inclusive of people with disabilities are 2 times more likely to meet or exceed their financial targets. They're 6 times more likely to be innovative and 6 times more likely to effectively anticipate change. And when you think about it, if everybody is the same in an organization, you're probably just going to get similar lines of thinking. Whereas the more diverse that workplace is, the more diversity of thought there is. When we're consumers and we go into a store and we see diversity, we see ourselves reflected in that business, chances are we want to give more business to that organization, to that business, whether we realize it or not. We like to see ourselves reflected in the organizations that we do business with. In terms of an employee perspective, from an employment perspective, there's a 72% higher staff retention rate. 86% had equivalent or better attendance than peers, and that stat is to combat a perception that people with disabilities are absent from the workplace more often due to health concerns or other reasons. The stats just don't show that. and 90% performed equal or better than their coworkers. So statistics show that there is a business advantage to being more inclusive of people with disabilities. All right, so next we're going to get into the 4 pillars. We're actually going to dive in to the deep end of the 4 pillars of accessible employment. A different question, are you or a BC organization involved in any way with adaptive sports for people with disabilities? I'm not, but we can probably find that information for you and include it in the follow-up note to today's session. All right, so I'm going to share with you how the 4 pillars of accessible employment came to be. And by the way, we use this foundation for our recommendations to Accessibility Standards Canada. So a number of years ago, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years ago, we brought together a number of our stakeholders with BC Win, mostly employers, but some service partners as well. And we met for a day out at Pacific Autism Family Network. They've got some beautiful meeting space out there in Richmond. And we had about 75 people. And the big question was, what does it take for inclusive hiring of people with disabilities to work and to work well? And so there are a number of activities to kind of draw that out throughout the day. And we had lots of flip charts up on the walls around the room. And at the end of that day, we had a lot to analyze. So we brought it back. And it became really clear after looking at all of the data there and the input from participants that there were 4 key things. And those 4 pillars, there we go. I love it when you click and it works. Those 4 pillars are commitment, readiness, recruitment, and retention. So commitment involves, there is a commitment from senior leaders in the organization to be inclusive. Readiness is activities that prepare the organization to shift those long-held practices. Recruitment means that there's active recruitment to recruit diverse talent. And retention is ensuring full engagement throughout the employment life cycle. Employment life cycle is a term that we're hearing more frequently. So the federal legislation references employment life cycle, and so does our provincial legislation. So you may be hearing that more frequently. What's interesting about the 4 pillars is when you look at it, typically in the past, that commitment to be inclusive has come from usually somebody in human resources that says, we should be hiring more inclusively, or somebody's been approached to apply for a position who has a disability. And then we jump straight into recruitment, right? That's been kind of we should be hiring more inclusively, and we jump straight into recruitment. But we fail to do the work. We fail to do that readiness piece, which is to really help our hiring managers, even help our recruitment teams understand what we need to shift. You don't have to be a couple of years in readiness, but there does need to be some effort put into preparing the organization to shift those practices. And retention, an afterthought, right? We tend not to think of the retention aspect, particularly for people with disabilities. Career progression and development, important. So commitment, readiness, recruitment, and retention. We're going to dive in a little deeper to each of the pillars and talk about some practices there too that would fall in under each pillar. But one thing I'm going to suggest is that commitment should be supported by human resources, by the recruitment team and the HR team, but it really has to come from the top, right? It has to be valued by the senior leaders in the organization for it to really work and work well. Otherwise, it's the HR team pushing that rock, that big boulder up the hill, and that's a difficult spot for the team to be in. That commitment really does need to be well communicated and come from the top. So let's start with commitment. Yeah. So that's commitment is building that foundation for inclusion, right? The commitment is made and it's supported, communicated by the senior leaders. If an organization is just embarking on inclusive hiring of people with disabilities, people need to know the why, and they need to they need to see that reflected, that messaging reflected by their senior leaders. Also under commitment, that there's a value in terms of we're valuing diverse talent in our organizations. And when we are looking at people for job opportunities, we're focusing on their ability in relation to the opportunity. And there's a difference there. What are the skills? What are the attributes? What are the qualities this person is bringing to the job? Not what the person can't do, but focus on what the person can bring to your organization. Also under commitment, we look at, first of all, that employment opportunities exist in the organization or are created, right? So we have, if you're in a non-unionized environment, that's easier to do. You have to have a need. I'm not suggesting to create roles that may not be needed in the organization, but there has to be a need. And a hiring goal is set. So it's the reason why I'm suggesting hiring goals are set, like really when the commitment to be inclusive is made, how far do you want to go? Is it if 15% of the external community has a disability, is your goal 15% of your workforce? You're definitely not going to get there overnight, but setting a goal. So over the next year, we want to hire 5 people. We want to hire a person in each of the key areas and frontline areas of our business, because that communicates that your business is welcome here because you can see yourself reflected in the organization. Exploring and developing community partnerships. So this is not something that you have to do alone as an organization. There's a lot of support that is funded either by the provincial government or the federal government. You've got Work BC and Burnaby. So if you've already established those community partnerships, that means who are the people who are the organizations in your community that can help support your commitment, help provide you with some advice when you get to the readiness stage, and we'll talk about that as well. So yeah, exploring and developing using those community partnerships. We know our initiative was a way for the federal government. We're actually funded under employer stream, so employers are our clients. And it was the government's way of providing support to employers who want to be inclusive, because we provide a lot of more consulting opportunities with businesses. So yeah, exploring and developing community partnerships. You do not have to do this alone. There are a lot of resources out there that will not cost your business anything to engage with. And there's a lot of support coming by government, especially at the provincial level, to help employers better engage this talent pool, because we know that this talent pool was hugely impacted by COVID. A huge percentage more during COVID, where people were in vulnerable positions, were laid off, and were disconnected from the workforce. Also under commitment, we include a recommendation that if you're unionized, involve your union in this process. Get them on board at the earliest stage possible, and ask for their support as well. Unions also have an obligation to not put up barriers in this space. So, but they can be very helpful to you as an organization if there's a common voice and language around this. Another way to support and showcase your commitment when you're building a foundation for inclusion is to reach out and explore things like internships and co-ops. It doesn't have to be always full-time or part-time positions. But even, some of the post-secondary organizations have programs specifically for students with disabilities. And so if you are interested in supporting an intern coming in who's also supporting their education, that might provide you with some early talents as well. So when you have an intern, you have a chance to see that person, how they work. And when their person is graduated, they may be a resource for you to consider on a more permanent basis. So that's commitment. Our next pillar is readiness. Again, this is probably the area that requires the most attention, and to be very deliberate in how this is rolled out in your organization. So this is really preparing your organization to be inclusive. We're spending a lot of time these days in working with human resource teams on the readiness piece. We know during COVID and coming out of COVID, there was a lot of transition amongst human resources professionals and teams. There was a lot of turnover. People took an opportunity to either change careers or shift into a different organization. But so we're actually spending a lot of time in the readiness stage doing some training and support with new team members who've come into the organization and need some support in training on how to do things differently. But readiness really involves, having a lead within the organization to really take the lead in actioning the plan with the senior leadership team, and to take deliberate actions to communicate internally within the business, and communicate why the organization is doing this. What are the benefits to the business, to the community, to individuals? How does it align with your workplace values? Why are you doing this? But having someone actually take the lead to action that plan will be important. Essentially, you want to identify and remove barriers that in the application process, the hiring process, when you're onboarding a new employee, and ultimately in the workplace. There's a lot of support around this for you, and this is also something that you can reach out to WorkBC for in terms of support, and explore if there are costs, what's available to you in terms of funding that's available for businesses. Typical barriers in the application process involve those behavior-based interviews, for starters. Really tricky for people who are neurodiverse, in particular people with autism. Not everybody, but for some. And I'm going to say most. Having over 30 years in human resources, I actually remember when behavior-based interviews were first introduced. And it was back in the 80s. And it was during a time where the baby boom population was at its highest, and there were a lot of people to choose from. And so this approach was developed as a way to screen people out. It wasn't developed to screen people in. And we're in an entirely different time now, where I would question, can we afford to screen people out? And can we afford to overlook processes that have that unintended consequence? So the reason why behavior-based interviews are so tricky is the way they're structured, right? Can you tell me about a time when you did ABC in order to accomplish X, Y, Z? It's what are you really asking for? So it can be really difficult for a person whose brain is set up a little differently to follow that. What are you really asking me for? So really straightforward questions. And we've actually worked with some of the larger corporations that have these behavior-based interview guides, and help to rewrite those questions in a way that's just really straightforward. And it actually, the recruiters actually report how much better it feels to ask that question, because it is more straightforward, and they're actually getting more clear answers. And so having a look at identifying and removing barriers in your application process, that hiring process, onboarding, and in the workplace. If you have people with lived experience in your organization, people who have identified as having a disability, and include people in the process, in the readiness process. Invite people to provide their perspective on how accessible your workplace is and what could be done differently to make it more accessible for that employee and for others in the future. So this is really, the readiness phase is really about applying that change management process. And again, you don't need to be in this for years, but taking the time to be able to prepare hiring managers and supervisors and recruitment teams to shift those long-held practices. Yeah, training and education. There's lots of training support out there. Again, could be at no charge for your organization. You're really creating a caring culture of inclusion for leaders and staff. And then at the end of the day, what you want to be able to have is some recruitment best practices to hire people with disabilities, and whether that disability is visible, apparent or not. I think if a person uses a wheelchair for mobility, we're pretty good at understanding that, person needs to get through the door in order to come in for an interview. So steps will present a problem, having a button to push so there's an automatic door. I think we kind of understand that level of accessibility, but we really don't have a clear understanding for people when their disability is not visible. So that's something worth exploring in your own organization. Yeah, so that's the readiness pillar. We've got commitment from our senior leaders. We've got somebody taking the lead and actioning the plan that's been developed. We're helping to prepare our organizations to be inclusive, and now we're ready for recruitment. So this is really all about adapting our recruitment process to hire diverse talent, right? And this is active recruitment. This is not a passive recruitment. What I mean by that is, excuse me, working with your community partners that you've established this relationship with for recruiting people with disabilities. And so that means actually putting opportunities out to those partnerships and seeking candidates, job seekers for those opportunities. It's participating in community job fairs, making sure you're positioning diversity of your organization as an asset. I have to say the younger generation of people coming into the job market now have been raised with diversity in mind, particularly in our communities here in the Lower Mainland. And it's an expectation that the workplace will be diverse and that not everybody looks and is the same. When you think about it, they've been raised through the education system with people with kids with disabilities in the classroom, not during my time when kids with disabilities were in a different school. So you'll be able to, during active recruitment, engage different interview styles and approaches. For example, practicums might be a good way to see how a person can perform to the jobs, work trials, working interviews, using a working interview style. Proactive disclosure of abilities. So one of the things that we do is when we have a referral from one of our service partners, we focus on two questions. There's really only four we ask. One is, obviously, what are the person's strengths and experiences in relation to the opportunity? The second is, what do we need to adapt in our interview process so this person, in our typical interview process, so this person can demonstrate their best? So we get answers to that. For example, if a person is deaf, we would ask for an ASL, American Sign Language interpreter, to be present during that interview and to be present during onboarding so that the person can learn in the best way possible. And there's lots of technology available for us outside of having an ASL interpreter in the workplace. We ask for, what would we need to do? What do we need to make sure we do to set this person up for success in their career, so that we're getting that information that we need to know, not necessarily asking for the person, for the person's disability, but we're asking for the information that we need to know. So what do we need to adapt? We're specifically sourcing that information in our interview process. And what do we need to do to set this person up for career success if they're hired? And so these days, there's a lot of job coaching support for people with who are neurodiverse, particularly people who have autism. And what the job coach can do is help you as the employer and the new employee, help you with orientation and onboarding. So the job coach is aware of the individual, their unique learning styles, what works best for that person to learn and learn well, the requirements of the job. So yeah, job coaches can be very valuable, and they come in for a short period of time. Once everything is set up well for that individual, they're no longer required unless there's a change in job duties or the person is promoted and goes on to career development elsewhere. Then you might want to bring the coach back in. We just recently hired one of our administrative assistants to support us, and she's neurodiverse, and we found it really valuable to have the coach set up a way for us to understand how our team member Natalie learns best, and helps provide some checklists for her. And she's absolutely fabulous. Her communication style with our service partners and any of the candidates, she sets up interviews, engages with candidates initially. She's so professional. And if she's got a question, she reaches out. But her job coach has been very, very helpful in helping us all navigate a new employment experience with Natalie, and again, set her and us up for success. Yeah, so make sure on the recruitment side, again, you don't have to go through this alone. So diversify some of your sourcing options that you would typically use. Make sure that you're using what's available to you. So those community partnerships you can lean on, right? Taking part in job fairs that are specifically intended for people with disabilities. I know Barb was mentioning there's another job fair coming up again in Burnaby later this year, possibly October, November. And the first hour or so would be dedicated to people with disabilities coming in and interacting with employers, seeking out some job opportunities, and then the doors would open to everyone to attend. So understand what's available to support you with this in your community, and take advantage of that if you're intentional about being inclusive. Yeah, so one of the things we encourage is focus on setting candidates up for success, right? Screen in versus screen out, and building candidate pools. That we recognize it's really difficult to build candidate pools in this current labor market with the shortages. But what this could mean is, and we've done this with some employers, if you know that you have regular career opportunities, I'm going to just pick a call center, for example, and you know that you're bringing on a few people every few months. Set aside one call center hiring specifically for people with disabilities. That's one way you can go about increasing workforce inclusion, and that gives you a chance to do recruitment that's focused on just people with disabilities for these opportunities. That's a way to build a candidate pool for openings in your organization. Work with your community service partners to do that. I'm sure they would be thrilled to hear from you if you reached out and said, hey, this is what we're thinking of for our next round of administrative positions or call centers or retail opportunities. We currently have a recruitment campaign underway now with London Drugs. All of their 79 stores from BC to Manitoba. And we're specifically referring candidates with disabilities to help them increase workforce inclusion of people with disabilities across all of their stores and head office and distribution center here in BC. Yeah, so looking at ways to screen people in versus screening people out. Build those pools if you can. Again, really difficult in this labor market, but I guarantee you, if you reach out to your community partner and said, here's what we're thinking of, Can you help us source some candidates? They'll be on it. You can also lead a pilot in your community. So if you want to test something out, you can lead it or bring together some other employers and lead a pilot specifically to increase workforce inclusion. I see a couple of questions here. Oh, thanks, Nate. Hey, I'm glad you're on this call. That's awesome. Nate responded to the inquiry on adaptive sports in BC, Neil Squire, also a great resource for you. And I think also in Burnaby, at least they were. Raj, how do you screen people in as you only do behavior-based interviews and union for hiring? All questions must be the same for scoring. Well, you can make a reasonable adjustment. So basically with employers, there's under accommodations, there's a requirement to accommodate an individual's disability up to a point of undue hardship. And you've probably heard this many times before. There's a number of factors that go into determining what's an undue hardship, but revising the standard behavior-based interview to being just more straightforward for a person who's identified that style of interview is a barrier to employment. The union also is obligated to support that as well. They've got a dual obligation to consider that. So I would check with your legal team and see exactly how you can go about that in your organization, Raj. But I think we work with BC Hydro, so I'm just thinking if you want to discuss this one further, we're happy to help you with revising those behavior-based interviews, and then you can also possibly run them by the union as well and get their involvement. If it's a barrier to employment and it doesn't meet the undue hardship, you're going to need to make some adjustments there. And we're happy to help you with that. Question, Malay, is there a feedback process to candidates that are screened out? If there is, who's accountable for the feedback, the hiring manager or HR? Depends on the organization, how you've set up your process there. Yeah, I think typically it's I don't know, different organizations have different responses, but it's usually the HR person who gets back to the candidate. There isn't an obligation for you to provide feedback to candidates that are screened out, but if there's something that person can improve on for the next interview, I always encourage, if you're open to sharing that, just be careful. Careful is probably not the right word. Just be cognizant of the words that you use. So just being clear and straightforward in terms of the recommendations that you have to that person to do differently. But typically, if you involve human resources, they'll be aware of how to respond to candidates who are not selected to go forward. Great, thanks, Raj. All right. So, last but not least, the most overlooked, most forgotten, is retention. So, retention is really making sure full engagement of diverse talent is there throughout the life cycle of employment. What that can mean is making sure that there's first of all, within the organization, that there's a culture of inclusion exists within the company, within the workforce, to retain staff, right? This also means that if there's an adjustment, we use the term adjustment as opposed to accommodation, but we mean accommodation. We find the term adjustments first of all, we make adjustments all the time for people in the workplace, right? We make adjustments for single parents or new parents to be able to pick up kids at daycare or whatever, start late, come in early. We make adjustments all the time. So we use the term adjustments in relation to persons with disabilities, because accommodation seems like a lot more work, but it's really not that difficult. But if there's an adjustment that's required, that's in place prior to the person starting. A good example might be someone who is neurodiverse, who is working in an administrative role in an office space where there's lots of cubicles, that person is able to wear maybe noise canceling headsets, that their workstation is not set up in the middle of a high traffic area, is very, very distracting. Sometimes in place, some people require lower lighting, just in an area that's not really well lit. Other things might be a sit-stand desk. Adjustments can be as easy as costing absolutely nothing at all, or it may have a cost to it. Most adjustments don't cost more than $500 if required at all. So, but making sure that that's in place prior to the person starting. So if there is an adjustment that's identified that the person has, they're set up for success from the upstart. There's nothing worse than going in and you having communicated what you need and not having it there on day one, because it just isn't setting people up for success. Yeah, so make sure that you're checking in with the new employee and seeking feedback. How are things going? Of course, we're doing that, right? Yeah, seeking feedback. What more do you need? What more can I do? That we're doing that at least in those first few days. And for organizationally, what you can do is incorporate goals, hiring goals in hiring managers' performance reviews. Make sure you're sourcing information on DEI and your employee surveys if you're using those in your organization. So that will give you valuable information. Also, if you're a larger organization, you can use employee resource groups and supporting and encouraging persons with disabilities employee resource group, because internal employees will be your best advisors. They can best advise you on what more you can do as an organization to make the employment experience one that people will want to stay with your organization and can contribute at their best. And that's really what we're looking at here, right? So having an employee resource group could be a hugely beneficial source of information and support and feedback and ideas and recommendations to you. Yeah, so being flexible and curious to bring out each person's best. We all need things a little differently, right? We're not all the same. And continuing to build that internal momentum and capacity within your organization. This is not a one-off, like, hey, we've done our training, we're finished. We've hired that person with a disability, now we're done. But it really is about building internal momentum, sharing those successes, sharing your successes at local community events, encouraging this and championing inclusive hiring with other businesses and other employers. Raj, I've heard the new hybrid model has helped persons with disabilities adjusting to the new workspace. Would you agree? Yes. I think the remote model, when we were all working remotely, was a huge game changer, right? A huge game changer for people with disabilities, because especially in areas in our province where transit infrastructure is not as good as it is in the lower mainland, right? So if you're able to be set up to work from home and work remotely, that opens up new talent for the organization, but a real game changer for the individual who may be more restricted in their ability to travel. Hybrid is still good. Hybrid is still good, but the remote is even better, whether it's remote part-time or full-time. We're looking at a couple of initiatives with some of our 2 employers that we're working with currently in implementing an entire remote opportunities. So these are organizations that have high volume openings that are more call center based, in incoming calls, so more customer service. They're having a tough time filling those positions. Like at one point, one of the organizations we're working with had over 800 openings. So, the motivation to do things a little differently was quite high. And again, we are challenged in filling some of those opportunities we've currently got in our organization. So now's the perfect time to look at what can we do differently to have access to talent, right? So yeah, that's a really good point. Is there funding in BC for small businesses and entrepreneurs for assistive technologies to minimize or overcome their barriers to disabilities as it relates to employment activities? Yes, I do believe, and I think Barb is going to speak to that. I think there's something in Small Business BC that's available.
Yeah, there's a small business grant, $2,500, that will support employers in a variety of ways. I can put the link in the chat, and folks can take a look at it.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Nate, was there anything else outside of Small Business BC that you might be aware of that you can share? Okay, if there is, feel free to share that, Nate. That would be awesome. Okay, so this is our chance to really have a chance to talk about any of the questions that you have, specific. I know some of you have been using the Q&A feature throughout, but let's take some time to go through what questions you have regarding adjustments to make sure your practices are inclusive. I'm going to share with you some additional resources that you can tap into that are available to you at no charge, and let's have a chance for Q&A. What questions do you have regarding adjustments to ensure your practices are inclusive? This is where I get really nervous. Raj, thank you.
Can you hear me?
I can, yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah, so thanks again. This is just great information, Jamie, and all the work you do in this area. Of course, Hydro is really focused on increasing the representation of people with disabilities. Back to that hybrid question, what do you do if the adjustment is 100% remote for the person with disability, but other employees are asked to come in 2 days a week? Formerly in HR, I could see that could probably lead to some resentment, grievances, issues. How do you frame that so it's accepted?
Yeah, and I think this is something we're going to, as a society and as businesses, we're really going to struggle with for a bit, especially in unionized environments. I think it's a lot easier in a non-union environment. I'm not yet sure where the threshold is in terms of meeting the duty to accommodate, and that's going to be important. But if we step back from that, and let's say we know it's going to be on a situation by situation basis, and what the nature of the person's disability is, and the reason why 100% remote is required. So I'd love to give you a straightforward, I'm just going to give you my opinion, but this is an area that
no, that makes sense.
Yeah, we're definitely going to be exploring this in our communities for sure. Yeah, in our organizations.
Yeah, I can relate a situation. We had a very open office environment, and I had a person with a declared disability, cognitive divergence. She needed an office, so we had to accommodate and build an office. And it was very challenging to explain to a floor of 100 people why this one individual has an office, but
right,
by and large, people were understanding.
Right. We tend to understand when we get the full picture, right? But the challenge becomes,
that's right. Yeah,
we often can't communicate the full picture, right? It's a catch-22 in some situations, right. But I think it's all about how we're positioning. You know, how our organizations are positioned as caring, inclusive cultures, and the messaging that is around that, and in practice, how does that really, what does that look like, and how does it feel, right? But I get you.
Yeah, got it.
Thanks for that question. It's a good curveball. Any other questions? I see. Let's see. Okay. Scott, we have done well with the first 3 pillars and now need to work on the 4th pillar. Question is about additional support options in the community and to help with retention. And somebody's popping up. Yeah, so that's a good question. And it leads me to my next slide. So we are very fortunate in BC to have the President's Group. And I've put up this slide. It's a cut and paste from a couple of slides, but these are the CEOs of some of our major organizations who are business leaders that have come together to really focus, first of all, to commit their organizations to be more inclusive of people with disabilities, and also to share out what they're doing with the broader business community in British Columbia. And so you can see the website up top, accessibleemployers.ca. They have fabulous resources, and it's all funded through the provincial government. The resources are primarily for employers. And so you can go on that website, have a look at different options, and definitely there's going to be resources there for you. On the retention side, you'll probably see, Scott, some resources on retention there. Additional support in the community to help with retention. If you've got specific questions, you're welcome to connect in with Work BC. We've got Nate here from Neil Squire. I'm sure Nate would also be happy to assist with any specific questions. And of course, we're here to support you as well through CanWin, so reach out. Yeah, and you'll get a lot of support through Neil Squire, very specific to this talent pool. So, and again, the services are free to business. So feel free and make use of those community partners. Does that answer your question, Scott? And good for you to identify that that's an area for you to focus on. Okay. Awesome, thank you. Any other questions? I'm not seeing the full group, so let me just see. Any hands up? No? Okay. All right. Okay, well, at this stage, I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah and Eilette and Barb, just to wrap us up. And I really appreciate your questions throughout. These were, and comments, these were really great opportunities for us to kind of engage and understand a bit more about what's working in British Columbia. And I can't say enough about how fortunate we are in BC, where, you know, we've just expanded into Ontario and all the other regions. And there's a lot of conflict happening on Ontario with the service partners. And we're very fortunate with the level of support we have in our province and the knowledge that employers are sharing with each other and the momentum around inclusive hiring. So we have a lot of lessons that have already been learned that can be shared with businesses. And of course, we'll continue to learn more as we increase our hiring of people with disabilities in our organizations.
Thank you, Jamie. That was really a lot of information, but very good information. I think a lot of resources, and obviously we'll send everything in the follow-up email to everyone so you can have some time to go over it. And thank you, Jamie, Barb. Thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate your time. Have a great afternoon, everyone.